excited to meet with you all tonight, strategize, and get out there and kick butt. I'll send it back over to Todd.
Yeah, I think it's coming back to me. Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful to be with you all. This is so exciting. And let me make a quick announcement before we get into this. We're going to be talking a lot about a lot of sensitive issues tonight. And so we know that press are here with us tonight. And so if you're press and if you want to quote or attribute folks from this evening, we ask that you reach out to us. I think we'll put an email in the chat now. We ask that you reach out to us, and we'll either confirm that you can attribute or we'll get you in touch with the person. So we're just asking that we keep this a sensitive space because there's a lot going on, people's livelihoods at stake. And so thanks for that consideration. All right, so I'm just going to give us a quick overview about the night and quick framing, and I'm going to pass it to some amazing folks who are going to walk us through from there. So first, what we are going to do is hear from leaders from different unions throughout the country that are going to help us understand what we're all seeing as a really chaotic moment, where we're getting executive order after executive order each day, and our head is spinning, and every sector and all sorts of people feel like they have a target on their back, and higher ed is definitely one of them. And so we really want to put that into frame and understand what this moment is and who we're building solidarity with and what kind of fight we're going to take to fight back and win what we need to win. And then after that, we want to hear from higher ed workers who are the ones that are bearing the brunt right now from the federal funding cuts. And so we're going to hear from people who are in labs, postdocs, researchers, all sorts of folks, and really get a feeling for what we're actually facing here. And then our amazing leaders from United Auto Workers are going to help us think through the best way to communicate about our research and about this moment with this larger public audience. So that's really what we're going to do. I think at the very end, we're going to talk through the events that are coming up, and I'm just going to lay them out here so we know what they are. Next week on Wednesday, on February 19th, we're going to have coordinated mass actions throughout the country. You can check laborforhighered.org and find an action near you, or if you don't find one near you, we want you to organize one, and we'll support you in doing that. Following that, about a week later on February 25th, we're going to organize a rally and a press conference in Washington, D.C. If you're in driving distance of D.C., we need you with us on the 25th. We need to take the fight that's building on our campuses to the Capitol where they're making these terrible decisions about the future of our country and the future of biomedical research and the future of higher ed. And then later in the spring, there's a bunch of other events we just want to flag. On March 4th, AFT, I think with other allies, is organizing an action at the Department of Education. That's an executive order that's deeply destructive to both all education, K-12 education or pre-K-12 education and higher ed. So we all need to be part of that and step into the fight around the Department of Ed. On April 17th, the Coalition for Action in Higher Ed is organizing another set of coordinated events on our campuses, and then also a group called Labor Spring that is out of Georgetown's Kalmanovitz Center is also planning actions on our campus in the spring. Those last few actions aren't part of Labor for Higher Ed, but they are complementary to the work we're doing. And I think that's what we see right now on the calendar. But as these things get crazy, I imagine, and if we face a constitutional crisis, which we are imminently facing, I imagine we're going to be called to be in the streets, to be in DC, to be in our state capitals a lot sooner and in a lot of different ways. And I guess the only thing I want to say before we move into the next section is that the executive orders that we've watched over the last couple weeks are the single greatest attack on higher education in the history of this country. And make no mistake about this, this is purposeful. The aim is to hollow out the biomedical research infrastructure of this country to save money for trillion-dollar tax cuts for the billionaires of this country. That's what's going on here. The freezes, pauses, and caps of federal grant funding will destroy and are destroying critical life-saving health research. And it's going to have impact on our labs, on our research, yes, but it's also going to impact ordinary Americans who are going to lose out on cures and therapies for cancer, for Alzheimer's, heart disease, diabetes, and many other things. And also, it's important to note that starving universities of federal grant funds will also lead to layoffs and job losses. And it's not about to happen, it's happening. Layoff notices at my home campus have already been announced. They're coming to every campus unless we stand up and stop this. And also, students are not going to be able to get the college education they want and they deserve if these cuts continue. The health, the economy, and the education of the communities surrounding our campuses will also crater with this. That's why we're here to say very loudly, collectively, hands off our healthcare, hands off our research, and hands off our jobs. And so let's get this going. Let's think through how we're going to bring this fight to the Capitol, and we're going to win back the biomedical research and the higher ed that we need. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my amazing comrade, Margaret, Vice President of CWA, to take us into the next section.
Thank you so much, Todd. And I'm going to echo a few of the words that you said tonight. Hello and good evening, everybody. I'm Margaret Cook, Vice President of Communication Workers of America's Public Healthcare and Education Worker Sector. And I am eager to get to work with you tonight to strategize about how we come together and fight back on these unacceptable, unethical, immoral, illegal attacks on essential funding for health, research, and education in this country. These are funds that impact the lives of all of us. I know you know what this means for union members across the country and for workers in labs, hospitals, research centers, and clinics. What it means for union members working in countries across this country, from teachers to the folks who drive, feed, and attend to our kids. But I also know how much it means for the people who serve and are cared for by these union members and all workers like them, whether they're in a union or not. What it means for people currently surviving and fighting illnesses here and across the globe. Every one of us has something at stake, and every family has a story. I know mine does. I'm currently watching loved ones fight cancer, while this administration has the shameless audacity to attack cancer patients and research. It's just wrong. What it means for working class kids going to school who are counting on a meal to be served, to be picked up and taken safely to and from, to learn in a supportive environment. And then there are the families of the people who work in these places, the communities that rely on these spaces. This is so much bigger than what any of us does in an individual lab at our local school or in our clinics. These attacks are on our lives and our livelihoods, and they impact all of us. This is why we've got to unite across our unions, across our kinds of work, and across our communities to stand up, speak out, resist these attacks, and defend the services and work that we do for the people we serve and work for. I know that CWA has thousands of research workers, lab technicians, and clinicians in higher education systems across this country who get it. And we've got school bus drivers and cafeteria workers in K-12 places who get it, just like you get it. Now we've got to make sure other folks get it. Tonight, we've got to talk strategy. We cannot act without thinking. We need a plan and we need a message. We need to know what our points of leverage are. We need to know what our strengths are and how to use them. And we need to know how to make sure that the public understands what's at stake. I know some of us can get very into the weeds about our work and what we do because we live in those details in the day-to-day. But what we need to be able to do is talk about what the impact of our work is, who it helps, what it achieves, and what happens when Trump and his extremist agenda shuts it down. So Hilo, tonight, let's plan and prepare to take action because we will not accept them taking the people's money. It's ours. It's for essential work that's fundamental to the public good. And we will not back down until it's back in our hands to do what it's meant to do. We're not going to accept these attacks on our health, healthcare, on scientific research, on our educational institutions, from Trump, from his MAGA extremists, and certainly not from the billionaire oligarchs who fund them every step of the way. We are going to fight like hell for our lives and our livelihoods. That's what unions do. That's what we do. So thank you, Helu. Let's get into it. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Astra Taylor from the Debt Collective.
Hello, everyone. My name is Astra. I'm so honored to be here tonight with all of you. There are so many important fights right now, and things to be part of. And I'm here because actually I think this is one of the most important fights. This is such a critical piece of what needs to be done. So I'm here representing the Debt Collective, which is the world's first union of debtors. If you know us, it might be for our work on student loan relief. We've been leading the fight for student loan cancellation, fighting alongside student debtors for the last 10 years. But for us, it has never just been about canceling student debt. We've always coupled the demand for student debt relief with the demand for free public college, right? Which is something that we used to have a lot more of in this country. So we always talk about college that is free as in cost, but also free as in freedom, as an essential democratic good. That vision, of course, is anathema to the far right, which wants to destroy public education and salt the earth, to quote Christopher Rufo from a tweet earlier today. They're obviously gaining ground, but I don't think the public is cheering their attacks. And that's what I want to talk about. I don't think the public is cheering them, but I don't think the public is aware of how important this fight is, because for decades, Republicans have been on the offense, painting colleges as elitists and as playpens for the rich, and student debtors as privileged, and all this. And too many liberals and Democrats have either reinforced their frame or offered a very limited vision of higher education as kind of career training that is ultimately to be debt financed. And the crisis of student debt, which affects 45 million people, has really hurt people's impression of higher education. And so we need to come up, I think part of our strategy needs to be coming up with a frame that rejects that, rejects both of those understandings, and centers a vision of higher education as, again, an essential democratic good, as a right, as something that's accessible to people of all classes, especially the working class. And if we don't do that, I think we're in big trouble. So, what I want to say with my limited time here is just don't be meek as you fight for your jobs, for your research, because it is a fight for the broader community. I think it's also a fight, again, for democracy, for truth, knowledge, right? For inclusivity, equality, for opportunity. And to win, we're going to have to do some hard stuff. We're going to have to organize within higher ed, but also outside of higher ed. Wall-to-wall organizing within our campuses, but also we need to organize the community. I think debt organizing can play a big part of that. Again, 45 million people have debt, student debt. A lot of people want to avoid going into debt. A lot of debtors are very worried right now. But this is a fight that really should reach so deeply into the lives of so many people. And so that collective is here to say, we want to work with you all on this, on building a big we that can stand up to these attacks. I think debtor organizing is one piece of that, both thinking about people's personal debt. We also want to offer solidarity and strategy, thinking about institutional debt, the way that our colleges are forced to go into debt, and that can be a tool of austerity. So we're here in solidarity with all of you. Thanks so much for having us. And again, this is really a fight for the ages. We're so glad to be here.
Thank you, Astra, and thank you so much for your solidarity. It's going to take all of us. You are absolutely right. Next up, we're going to hear from Jessica Tang from AFT, Massachusetts.
Thanks so much, Margaret, and good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Tang, and I'm a middle school teacher, currently serving as the president of AFT Massachusetts. I'm also the daughter of immigrants and the daughter of two scientists, a molecular biologist and a polymer engineer. And I know the importance of research and science. For many of you, I know that tonight may be your first union meeting or fight back meeting. You, like me, may not have come from a union household and may not have grown up learning a lot about unions. But I'm here to say that now is absolutely the right time to get involved and learn and get involved in the fight. And we are so glad you're here, because that is the path forward. The only way to win is for us all to unite and have the courage to take action collectively. Labor unions are at the forefront of the fight, and education unions in particular are on the front lines. And at AFT Massachusetts, we represent not just educators and school staff in pre-K through grade 12 schools, but we also represent a number of higher ed staff as well. And what I know is that the fight that higher ed is having goes hand in hand with the fights in pre-K through 12 education too. Because what happens in pre-K education impacts higher ed and vice versa, and our values and our work are intertwined. So this fight is about protecting education, but it's also a fight about protecting knowledge as a public good. As educators, we know that knowledge is power, and as unionists, we know that solidarity and collective action is power. And that is why authoritarians always go after labor and education first. And that is why we, more than ever, need to be unified in our fights. Knowledge and education are critical to democracy, and democracy will not continue to stand without us standing together to protect it. And these attacks are about defunding education for tax cuts for billionaires, and these attacks are about undermining science, knowledge, and education, because when we undermine education, it paves the way for oligarchy and fascism. But we are not going to let them undermine education, because please know you are not alone in the fight back. And that is perhaps the most important thing to remember. Solidarity and collective action are how we fight back, and K-12 public ed is in this fight with you. Tonight and upcoming actions will be one of many ways to start exercising your activist muscles and strengthening the ones you already have. And sharing your stories is a part of organizing to fight back. And I am so glad you are here tonight to hear them and share them. And I am so glad to be here in this fight with you.
Thank you so much, Madam President. And next up, we are going to hear from Nancy Gressinger, AAUP AFT.
Okay. Hi, I'm Nancy Glenn Griesinger. I'm a university professor and a research professor at Houston-Tillotson University. I'm also a member of the American Association of University Professors. HTU is in Austin, Texas, and my research is funded by grants supported by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And my grants focus on housing equality. Now, recent funding freezes and stop work orders and data removals have all delayed my research. It has slowed my students' academic growth, their progress, and also threatened my career. I'm also a single mother, and the recent attacks on research have threatened my own livelihood. Now, my developing this housing equity index, which I have developed as a statistician, it measures housing disparities so that we can see and understand where housing policies lead to more equitable housing and less equitable housing as well. So for example, is there a difference between housing where people with disabilities live versus where people without disabilities live? Well, this is what my housing equality index will measure. And the thing about the housing equality index, it's new to HUD. And it also incorporates climate vulnerability factors so that we can understand and see where housing conditions intersect, and also the environmental risk as well. Now, ordinary people will be able to access and use this because we're going to have this on the web, and they will be able to use the Housing Equality Index. It can guide their choices about where they want to live, and anyone will be able to go and look at the Housing Equality Index to see for themselves where the housing options are and more or less equitable. Now, my goal with this research is to influence policy changes to improve housing access and climate resilience. Using the Housing Equality Index, or HEI as I call it, this lets policies to be guided by HUD, and it would be more equitable and more objective and biased because it is a statistical measure. It is a mathematical measure. I'm inventing math. So as a mathematician and as a statistician, my goal is to make policy more unbiased. The numbers do not lie. That means that ordinary people will be able to live in an unbiased world as well. Despite setbacks, I remain committed to advancing the Housing Equality Index and supporting students in housing equality. It is vital that we overcome these disruptions to continue work that is critical on housing and climate injustice.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you for all of the work that you do. Really, it makes a difference in our communities, and I really hope that you not only get refunded, but funded even higher so that you can continue on this great work. I'm going to shoot it over to Neil Sweeney.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neil Sweeney. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of UAW Local 4811, and I work in the UAW Higher Ed Department. Previously, I have been a neuroscience researcher as a graduate student, a postdoc, and a staff researcher at the University of California. Could you start the slides, please? So last Friday evening, I'm going to give some background about the cuts in research that the Trump administration is trying to force through and their impacts on research budgets, on research at universities, and on jobs and communities. And to give people the tools to fight back. So can you go to the next slide, please? So late Friday evening, last Friday evening, to be exact, at 6:19 Eastern time, the Trump administration announced that it was slashing research funding by reducing overhead rates, or also known as indirect cost rates, immediately. And this would affect all current and future grants. Researchers and university workers around the country immediately realized that this would lead to massive cuts to research budgets and would stop research in clinical trials such as on cancer, Alzheimer's, and many more in their tracks. And not only that, instead of saving money, it would decimate jobs and local economies. But through our unions and by organizing, we are fighting back. I'm going to share some background about how research funding works so we can debunk some myths, so we can talk to our coworkers, organize our friends and families, and demand to our elected representatives that they reverse these cuts. So if you go, this is the announcement that they put out late Friday evening. So can you go to the next slide, please? So it's important to remember that this isn't the first time the Trump administration tried to slash science budgets. They tried almost the exact same thing in 2017 by cutting these overhead rates. They failed. They also tried to cut NIH budget. That's on the right side there. You can see cuts of 22% to the NIH, 25% to cancer, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. What happened? They tried to cut. Actually, research funding was increased that year. Even though they tried to cut it by 25%, research funding went up by about 10% to the NIH. And you can see this is NIH funding over time. Between the years of 2017 and 2020, each year, NIH funding increased. Why? Because people organized. This is pictures from the March for Science. That was just one example, but many forms of organizing. People fought back so that they fought back against the cuts and actually won higher rates of research funding. So can you move on to the next? So indirect costs, it's kind of a weird, obscure title, seems wonky. And that's part of the goal. They want to think that, oh, they're just cutting something that's not part of, it's not really research, it's just this like technical thing. These rich universities are getting all this money. But we're actually in a fight for research in the public interest. Don't believe me? Project 2025, the extreme right-wing manifesto calls out indirect costs specifically and claims that they subsidize leftist agendas. Is fighting cancer a leftist agenda? I guess it is. So moving on to the next slide. So just a broad overview of research budget. This is the University of California. Grants and contracts are the #2 source of funding for the University of California after the medical centers. And of those, 1 in 6 revenue dollars comes from a grant or contract, and about half of those comes from a federal grant or contract. And that's exactly what's being targeted right now. If you go on to the next slide. So you get a research grant. It comes in kind of 2 different forms. You get things, what's called direct costs, salaries, benefit, things, equipment, supplies for your research, travel, and another category, what's called indirect cost. And indirect costs are also known as overhead, but they cover costs that are essential to the university's ability to conduct that research. These include facilities, building maintenance, and administration. Now, what does that mean exactly? It sounds kind of vague. You could easily slide into, this is like myth #1. Does it really fund research? If you cut this stuff, does it mean actually more money for real research? Wrong. If you move on to the next slide, you can see what this funds are actually spent on. So you're working in a lab, you're doing your research. There's all kinds of workers at the university that support that research and all kinds of other funding. So there's many kinds of workers, financial analysts, technical workers, administrative, maintenance workers, janitorial, security. They all support the research. some of these funds go to make sure it's a safe workplace, that lab waste gets disposed of correctly, that you have internet and other resources to do your research, that you have library and access to journals to do your research. There's core facilities that are essential for like microscopes and other kind of processing facilities, utilities, just running the building. So these are all parts that if they were cut, the research probably couldn't go on, and it's going to mean job loss across the university. Next slide, please. So just for one example on one grant, what these cuts are going to mean. So let's say you get a grant of $500,000, kind of an average grant. Indirect costs are expressed as a percentage of that grant. So if you get a grant of $500,000, in this example, the indirect costs rate is 64%. So on top of that, you get another 64%. So in this example, direct cost 500,000, indirect cost 320,000, total grant 820,000. So that's just kind of your standard grant, how it works now. Next slide, please. So under this cut, it would be a 30% reduction in the size of the grant. Instead of 820,000 between direct and indirect costs, that would be slashed to by 30%. So if you expand that to all the grants, this would be blow a massive hole in research budgets, and would likely lead to layoffs and would just stop the research in their tracks. Next slide, please. So just a few myths. I'll go over this quickly. I already covered this. Are indirect costs, some kind of slush fund? No, they're highly regulated. They're negotiated with the university and the federal government every year, and they go to real jobs, real necessary and important purposes that directly support the research. Number two, is it actually more money to spend on actual science? False. We saw Trump's agenda is to slash science. We need to fight back, so he can't do that. Number three, they make this false equivalence between how private foundations and the federal government fund research. That's a false equivalence. Private foundations at times offer less overhead. The university can decide to accept that or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But if they accept it, they're actually losing money. They have to subsidize that from other sources. And they only decide to accept it because they know the federal government pays higher rates. So to claim that the federal government and a private foundation are the same, totally false, and just builds his argument that they're slashing research budgets. Last slide, I just want to mention that there's 22 attorneys general filed a lawsuit to put this on hold. Temporary restraining order was issued Monday morning. That's a good step. We need to use the courts when we can, but we can't rely on the courts. We need to organize and fight back. And just to finish off, every research dollar, this has been found time and time again, every research dollar translates into $2.50 in economic activity. So they claim they're saving money, false. It'll actually destroy economies. And research funding supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in every state and nearly every congressional district. So we're going to be talking about how to talk about your research and how to fight back and how to organize. We need to make sure all the members of Congress hear that these cuts are going to destroy jobs in their district. Back to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Neil. That was so informative. I mean, even for me, I don't work in that world. And so to learn the difference between direct and indirect costs will go a long way in my own messaging. So thank you so much for that, Neil. Next up, we're going to have a panel with some workers who are being impacted by this funding freeze. And so we're going to start with Emilia Ventriglia from UAW 2750.
Hi, I'm Emilia, she, her. I am a grad researcher in neuroscience and also the president of UAW 2750, and that's at the National Institutes of Health. Our local consists of 5,000 early career researchers, everyone from people who just recently graduated college to postdocs. And our work drives the critical high-risk, high-reward research that we do, everything from cancer treatments to Alzheimer's research, vaccine development, and more. Yet right now, that work is under attack. Since January 20th, there's been sweeping freezes and cuts that have completely gutted our ability to do our work. We've had freezes on all of our purchases, which are only now partially lifted. That has been stalling our work. There has been a federal hiring freeze. It's been cutting off the pipeline of early career researchers who keep it running. Without new fellows, all of these studies are going to fall apart, the knowledge is lost, and we just don't have any progress on any of these projects. You know, we completely canceled the interviews for PhD students at the NIH, leaving dozens who are here wanting to stay as researchers on their projects, unable to have a clear path forward and having to look for jobs elsewhere that may also not be funded. The hiring freeze isn't also just a pause on recruitment of new workers. The NIH is now effectively moving to terminate some of our jobs by refusing to renew our annual contracts. We're already on such time-limited job security, and now every scientist that we lose means another study abandoned, a cure delayed, a breakthrough that may never happen. We also have a lot of communication gag orders. They've been tightening them. They've been restricting our ability to share taxpayer-funded research. We've had to cancel our research talks, our conferences. We can't even meet with our collaborators. Just recently, there was a conference that was supposed to happen on our Bethesda campus on adolescent mental health. And, you know, this is at a time when suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people. Experts from outside the NIH were set to exchange ideas and share updates, but because of this gag rule, that meeting never happened. That's not even to talk about the study sections that have still been frozen. And now we have no more DEI initiatives. I am a first-generation scientist. I am here because we have these initiatives to promote the diversity of science. And we're just not able to do any of that. And I think Marjorie can probably share more about some of the stuff that we've been facing.
Thank you, Emilia. Marjorie Levenstein, UAW 2750.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marjorie Levenstein, and I'm a member of NIH Fellows United, UAW Local 2750. My journey in the labor movement started at the University of Washington with UAW 4121, and that experience really shaped my understanding of what unions can accomplish when we stand together. During the first Trump administration, I saw firsthand how our union stepped up to protect international students, especially with the Muslim ban, and fought back against attempts to tax graduate student tuition waivers, which would have made grad school affordable to only those who are most well off. That showed me how unions not only fight for better wages and working conditions, they're also a crucial line of defense for our most vulnerable colleagues. Those experiences inspired me to help organize the unorganized fellows at the NIH. The work we do at the NIH is crucial for public health. For example, my research focuses on studying ketamine's abuse potential and investigating its potential as a treatment for opioid use disorder, including mechanisms behind its therapeutic effects. This work is particularly timely given the rapid expansion of ketamine clinics across the country and the ongoing opioid crisis. But right now, these funding and communication freezes are actively hampering our ability to do this vital work. I've had to put a collaborative project with a lab at Johns Hopkins on hold, and I know many others who are facing similar disruptions to their research. These freezes aren't just bureaucratic inconveniences, they are direct threats to our work and scientific progress and are harmful to all Americans. But unlike before we formed our union, we now have the collective power to fight back. While we're facing these challenges, the labor movement has grown significantly over the past 4 years, and higher education unions across the country have shown that when we stand together, we can protect our work and our values. The solidarity that I witnessed at UW wasn't an isolated example. It was part of a broader movement that continues to gain momentum, and that momentum is exactly what we need to challenge these harmful freezes and protect our ability to conduct crucial research. And for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Marjorie, and you're right. This is a very crucial time, and I truly hope you get to continue your work. I'm going to head on over to Elizabeth Vasquez from SUNY Albany and part of AAUP.
Hi, hola. I'm so happy that I'm here. I'm going to start saying that I'm a first-generation immigrant, and I relate to one of the speakers that say, like, as a first-generation immigrant and coming in and not having labor parents, it's interesting to find myself in this space right now because there is a lot of anti-immigrant policies that are being put in place, and because we are in academia doesn't mean that we are not affected by it. And I think that a lot of the things, I'm a public health practitioner, a lot of the things that we do rely on people trust in coming to us and doing preventing strategies. And a lot of the things that all of these executive orders are doing is creating fear and misinformation. And I think that when we have that, instead of moving forward the public health agenda, it's going to revert what we had done. I am here because I was a minority hire. They used to have those. And I wondered, even in the time that I had been at the university, there hasn't been a lot of minority hires, but we have improved the diversity of our university. But what will happen now if we cannot even work on that space? I'm also affected by the way the language needs to transition now. We need a new vocabulary for public health. There are words that we cannot use or can be flagged. And I'm thinking that what does that say to the people that we work with and the advents that we had done? I was listening to, I believe it was Nancy that was saying about how she created a tool. And that tool is looking specifically at social determinants, and public health is social determinants, and there has been an attack on social determinants. So it's just thinking about how can we bring this into the sphere where it's not just us, but it's the people that are coming behind us. Like, I would like more people like me to be in academia, but with all these cuts and all these other elements that are happening right now, I doubt it. I don't see people being interested in being in a space that has no security or can be transferred into something that is not what it was created to be. My students are frightened, some of them. We have the university where I am, it's a social mobility university. We have a lovely distribution, great diversity, but that also can be used as something that can be detrimental. So I'm thinking that for the students that are coming behind us and for the faculty that are here, I think we need to be united and be very precise and clear on the words that we use and how we use it and keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just want to correct myself. I thought that was a typo. You are actually with UUP, and I'd like to say, yo quiero decir muchas gracias, hermanita. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go to Karen Schindler from Rutgers, AAUP AFT.
Hi, it's really an honor to have the opportunity to share with everyone the impacts that the attacks on federal funding are having on our ability to effectively treat and cure diseases. I'm Karen Schindler. I'm a professor in the genetics department at Rutgers University and an AAUP member. And my NIH-funded research program focuses on reproductive health and genetics, specifically women's health. And we're focused on understanding the processes that are involved in making healthy eggs, with the long-term goal to figure out why that goes wrong in humans so frequently. And this is something that leads to infertility, miscarriages, and birth defects. And in doing this work, we're focused on something called control of chromosome segregation. Segregation now being a buzzword, flagging grants and review. This administration is calling out a simple biological process that involves cells dividing and distributing DNA into two new cells because of the resemblance of a word to a part of our dark history that they wish to downplay. And this shows how negligent and arbitrary the attacks of research really are. Our work and that of my colleagues is both basic in biology as well as translational. And with infertility on the rise, it is essential that we understand the causes of infertility, develop interventions, and improve current IVF treatments, which have sat at about 30% success rate per cycle for the last 20 years. Without this work, we jeopardize the ability for successful building of healthy families, something that the average and most US citizens prioritize. Reproductive health research also extends into understanding overall women's health and adult disease. I would even argue that if reproduction fails us one day, we won't have any diseases to work on. So I want to make sure that everyone who wants to have a family can have a happy, healthy one. This is an essential part of our existence on this planet, and it's critical that we keep it funded. This is why I'm standing up to defend research that protects, improves the health of everyday Americans. Thanks.
Thank you for all that you do, Karen. Such important work. Next, we're going to go to Candace Longoria from Rutgers, AAUP, AFT. She's a postdoc.
Thank you so much, Margaret. So my name is Candace Longoria. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Rutgers University in the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology. I'm also a first generation researcher and hopefully a future academic if we can get through this. My current department has worked for years to regularly provide training grants to their students and support their graduate and postdoctoral education through these training grants, which come through the NIH. Our department works very closely with environmental and climate scientists as well, and that's been a double hit on our research with all the executive orders that have been coming through over the last few weeks. Some of our studies include environmental pollutants, water contamination, reproductive health, and endocrine disrupting compounds, all of which are absolutely essential areas of research right now. Students in the department right now have questions, and their PIs and mentors do not have answers for them regarding what is going on. What are they supposed to expect? Where are they supposed to go? And how are they going to finish their degrees? Students are looking to each other for support, but if I'm being honest, morale has been pretty low since everything happened because no one knows what to do. The university sends out emails every week trying to give updates, but really those updates aren't updates. The graduate students have spoken with me about how they would rather quit their PhDs and just get a master's than spend 8 to 10 years as a graduate student on the current salary that Rutgers has, which Rutgers did win their strike and get that salary increase a couple years ago, but unfortunately it's still not enough to get by, and they would rather begin their lives and start having families and getting a successful career than sitting and potentially going into debt and making things that much harder when they get out. Myself and fellow students recently submitted fellowship grants in December, which is something that our department encourages and regularly supports us to do. And I found out this week actually that one of those students had her study section rescheduled, which was supposed to be in March. Mine is scheduled for March currently, and I've been avidly checking to see if mine's also going to get changed as well. I rely on that funding along with other students to continue to finish our research. And I think what's really hitting right now is that the postdoctoral fellows that I have met in this program have had some really serious, deep conversations about what do we do next, because our next step is looking to be the researchers and to build our labs and to start being the mentors. But we don't really think that that is going to be achievable if there's no money. And if the grants start getting cut and the funding gets cut, it's going to be even harder to get the funding that we need to do the research that we want to do. And it's disheartening. You know, we've spent decades going through the education that we have to get to where we want to be, and to have it cut back so quickly, and to see all these brilliant scientists thinking about non-academic careers for the sake of job security is heartbreaking. And I really identify with that because I'm right there with them.
Thank you, Candace. And I want to thank Emilia, Marjorie, Elizabeth, and Karen for also telling your stories tonight. And I'm looking forward to being there and fighting beside all of you so that we can restore the funding for your much needed research. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Levin.
Thanks, Margaret. And thank you everyone who shared your stories. I wanted to lift up two things that are coming up in the stories that everyone shared. One is just what's at stake, right? As Candace just mentioned, there are so many long-term effects that are going to be the result of all of the devastating federal policy changes that are coming up right now. It's not just a short-term fight. This is going to have consequences and impacts on decades of research to come if we're not able to beat back this fight. So with that, one of the things that we know we're going to need over the next couple of weeks as we escalate is to make sure that the stories that folks are sharing in this call, the stories that every one of us has to share, the almost 1,000 of us here and all of the folks that are doing wonderful research and really impactful research, know how to effectively communicate that to a general public so that people can be brought onto this fight and know really clearly what's at stake, what the decisions that the federal government is making right now are, how that's playing out and how that will continue to impact us for decades. So with that, I'm really happy to pass it to Tanzil from UAW 4811, as well as Abby from UAW 4121, who are two brilliant scientists who are going to talk to us a little bit more about how to effectively communicate our research and the impact of these freezes to a general public audience. Abby and Tanzil, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Levin. If we could start sharing the screen, that would be great. But hi, everyone. I'm Tanzil Chaudhary. I'm on the executive board of UAW Local 4811 at the University of California, and I'm a graduate student researcher in material science at UC Berkeley. I study neutron transmutation doping to analyze point defects and the electronic structure of van der Waals layered materials like germanium sulfide. And I'll hand it over to Abby.
Thanks, Tanzil. My name is Abby. I am staff with UAW Local 4121. And at the University of Washington, I was an electrophysiologist who recorded from CA1 neurons in the hippocampus in order to understand how membrane resonance contributes to circuit activity. And as you all may or may not have picked up on, Tanzil and I are giving examples of how scientists all too often introduce themselves and their work, right? What we said is heavy on specificity and facts, but even though there are hundreds of scientists and engineers on this call right now, I guarantee you that there are only a handful of people who can parse what we just said and figure out like why they should give a shit about it. So instead, I could say something like, hi, my name is Abby, and as a scientist, I studied a region of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus controls learning and memory, and when it's not working correctly, it can result in diseases like epilepsy or schizophrenia. Both versions of that introduction are true, but only one of them achieves effective communication. So when we ask, oh, and maybe we can go to the next slide, please. When we ask, what is scientific communication or just communication, it is more than conveying facts. It is about creating a narrative that communicates our power and our relevance. Just like your favorite novel is not just a series of facts about a character, it is more than just unadorned truth. It is a series of true things that are organized to drive home a specific point. And that narrative can be incredibly powerful. It's important for reaching our own members and our scientific community, but it is absolutely vital for reaching an audience beyond those spaces. And driving home the importance of what it is that we do to everyone, because we need that. So I am going to hand it over to Tanzil, and he is going to share some tips and specifics for exactly how to communicate effectively.
Thanks, Abby. And if we can go to the next slide, great. So your first step to good science communication is knowing your audience and what they know. When we're talking about the general public, you should assume that they have basically no background knowledge about your research and that they don't really have an inherent interest in it either. It's your job to present your narrative in such a way that it makes them interested. That means you should avoid any technical jargon. Including long, multi-syllable technical terms is an easy way to lose your audience. So instead of saying that your research is about medulloblastoma, you should say that your research is on childhood brain cancer. Or instead of saying how you study oxidized phospholipids and their effect on the heart, you should say that you study how certain fats contribute to heart disease. Relatedly, you need to boil down your work to its essential components. As scientists, we often work on one really small part of a much bigger picture. We study how a single biological mechanism might contribute to cancer, or how one specific molecule plays a role in a complex chemical process. For good science communication, you should forefront the bigger picture. Instead of leading with your small piece of the puzzle, start with the broad problem that you're trying to tackle. After that, you need to make sure that you share the upshot. What impact is your work going to have for everyday people? Abby's example from the beginning is a good one. The reason Abby studied that specific region of the brain is because if we can understand the causes of epilepsy or schizophrenia, we can get closer to treating those diseases. And odds are somebody knows somebody else who has one of those diseases and is invested in treating it. Next, you should add your personal stake. Why are you doing this research? You're sharing your work from your personal perspective, and the public feels most invested in human stories that they can relate to. Finally, you should be sure to take ownership of your work. Often, this is uncomfortable. Most scientists have a tendency to downplay our work, adding caveats like, oh, well, lots of other people work on this too. I only work on this one small piece. Of course, you shouldn't get up and say that you'll independently come up with the cure for cancer tomorrow, but you should be willing to say with confidence that if your work is successful, it could lead to a real progress towards a cure. So if we go to the next slide, we can look at an example. So here's what we call a pick and quote. from Aishi Zhao, a cancer researcher at UCSF, someone I'm proud to call my friend. And the first thing you should notice is that it's short. People's attention is in really high demand, and you need to be able to communicate your research concisely to make sure that you can capture that limited amount of demand that you have. In the quote, Aishi starts with a clear, simple statement of what she works on. Notice how she mentions that her work is on, quote, the most aggressive brain tumors. The public already has some sense of why treating brain tumors is important, and by using the adjective most aggressive, she communicates a heightened sense of importance in her work. She adds her personal stake by mentioning that she herself is a cancer survivor, and she connects her work back to the impact that these new therapies will have on patients and how her work could lead to better treatments that folks really can't be waiting for. So if we go to the last slide, using what we've learned here, I want to go back and reintroduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Tanzil Chaudhary. I'm a graduate student researcher at UC Berkeley in the Material Science program. I study how we can tune next-generation electronic materials so we can build more efficient solar panels, longer-lasting batteries, and more effective radiation sensors. Through my work, I hope we can accelerate the transition to clean energy and improve worker safety at nuclear reactors. Like Levin said, sharing our stories is an extremely important piece of how we're going to lead the fight here. Most people really do not understand the importance of our work, and the Trump administration and all these far-right folks who are trying to cut our healthcare, our jobs, and our research, they're doing that by trying to obfuscate things, talking about indirect costs and other sorts of technical jargon to make people not pay attention. So we have to bring our own narrative to make that work. So with that, it's time to share your story. A link was just dropped in the chat by Tracy where you can share about your research. So I encourage everyone who's on this call to open up that form and share your story using what you've just learned here. If you'd like to be shared on some of these pick and quote templates or see more examples, you should feel free to reach out to me at tanzil@uaw4811.org. Thanks, everyone, and I'll hand it back to Levin.
All right. Thank you, Abby and Tanzil. And as Tanzil flagged, there's a form that Tracy just dropped in the chat where you can share your own story. As we're leading up to the events next week and then also the press conference on the 25th, we want to be sharing these stories as much as possible, again, to make sure that these stories and the real impacts of these policies are being communicated effectively to the general public. So in the last 2 minutes, we're also going to build on this theme of taking action and what you can do right now. So this webinar, this national strategy call is the first of 3 actions over February that, as Todd mentioned in the beginning, a coalition of labor unions that represent higher ed workers across from coast to coast, wall to wall, are coming together to organize. So I saw almost 1,000 people here today, and I'm guessing all 1,000 of us and more are going to be joining on actions on February 19th as part of our nationwide day of action. Tracy dropped a link to the website in the chat where you can see all of the actions that are currently already confirmed. If you do not see an action near you, please get in touch. There's a form that you can fill out to get in touch and be paired up with the toolkit that has a lot of the information that you need to start your own action. And we will be following up over the weekend with everyone to make sure that you are supported in planning and pulling off your cool action as well. Todd, I'm going to pass it to you to round us out and give an overview of the press conference on the 25th, and we will wrap up after that.
Yeah, hey everyone. So this has been amazing, and we've had so many amazing speakers, and we need you to get involved. So if you have an action planned in your region, figure out who's organizing it and be there on the 19th. If you don't, let us know. We'll help you organize an action on the 25th. Get connected to us. We want as many actions as possible on the 19th. And I just want to underline that we want to show and build build power at the campus level. That's why we're doing distributed actions around the country. That's why we're starting there, right? And so that's key because this fight is going to go on and we need to build power at home first. And building from there, we will have a press conference and a rally on the 25th in DC. But I also want to note that on the 19th, there's also going to be an action in DC that UAW will lead. So there'll be actions in DC on the 19th and the 25th. The 25th will really be a rally and a press conference. And I think the goal there is going to be to tell the people who are making decisions about our research, about higher ed, about our education, hands off and bringing the fight to them. But first, we need to build power at the campus level. So the 19th is critical, and it leads in to the 25th. And I think just to close this out, Marjorie said something that was so powerful about how labor is the last line of defense. And, right now, I think we all feel like we got a target on our back. And we do. I think we do have a target on our back. But I don't know that higher ed has ever been in a better moment to respond to this. Over the last couple of years, when people flagged this, we've seen like probably the greatest strike wave in higher ed that we've ever seen. We've seen the most new organizing on our campuses. UAW has been leading that, with AFT also critically organizing new units and many others. So we are poised to respond to this fight in a way we never said before. And as Levin just flagged, we had 1,000 people on this call tonight. And it just makes this point. Right now in this fight, our elected leaders are not going to save us. The presidents of our universities are not going to save us. We, the workers in our university, the unions and the organizations that represent workers and students and the communities where we work and live, we are the ones that are going to create the real fight back and stop this. And so it is our time to step up and step into this fight and lead. And that's what this night was meant to begin, just to begin in stepping us into. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all. Remember, hands off our research, our healthcare, our research, and our jobs. And this is not the end. This is just the beginning. Thanks, folks. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll see you in the streets on the 19th. We'll see you in DC on the 25th. And who knows where we'll see you after that. Have a great night.